They thought Mara Quinn would break. They thought the rancher's fists, the stench of whiskey, and the locked doors would keep her on her knees forever. But when he crawled through the river mud, bleeding and begging for his worthless life, she didn't pull the trigger. She could have ended him with one shot, one bullet for every bruise he left under her skin. She still remembers how he whispered, "Please, don't," and how she looked him dead in the eye and hissed, "Live with it." That was the night Mara Quinn chose something wilder than revenge. Freedom. She wanted him to wake up every single day knowing the woman he thought he owned was the one who walked away whole and left him crawling in the dark with nothing but his shame for company. In Dead Man's Hollow, they buried secrets deep, but they never buried Mara Quinn's spirit. When her father shoved her forward that night, wrists bound in dirty cloth, the saloon fell silent. "One more hand," he slurred. She's worth more than any pot you'll ever see." Rufus McCade's devil's luck dealt 4 aces, and just like that, Mara's name was gambled away. They said Mara would break the moment Rufus slammed the door behind her. The first time his fist fell, the first time she tasted blood that wasn't from her own split lip, but from biting her tongue to keep from screaming. They said women like her didn't last long. The ones who didn't run went mad. But Mara didn't run, and she sure as hell didn't go mad. Instead, every night she survived, she carved a line under the loose plank beneath her bed. The wood there was worn smooth by her fingertips. Proof that she still knew how to count what belonged to her. Time, breath, a name that hadn't yet been ripped from her mouth. Sometimes when the walls pressed in, she whispered her mother's verses. Words turned into a blade when fists couldn't be. Jedediah Holt rode back into town when the wind smelled of rain and rust. He didn't come for gold. He didn't come for whiskey. He came for Rufus McCade's throat. But vengeance has a way of twisting paths that were straight. Jedediah saw Mara once across the rickety porch, her eyes bright like a lantern that wouldn't die, no matter how dark the room. When Mara saw him, she didn't flinch. She just stared through him, into him, as if testing whether this scarred stranger was just another man looking to own something broken. But Jedediah Holt never wanted to own a damn thing again, only to burn the rot out of Dead Man's Hollow. And maybe, if God forgave him, to give someone a chance at freedom no bullet could buy. So what does it cost to buy someone's freedom in a place where a man can sell his daughter for a hand of cards? What does it mean to choose mercy when the barrel's warm, the trigger's tight, and every voice inside you screams to let the shot fly? Some say a bullet is the price, but Mara Quinn learned there's something wilder than revenge. She learned the truest kind of freedom is standing over the man who broke you and choosing to walk away. Back then, in these dusty crossroads towns, a woman's worth weighed less than a barrel of cheap rye. Mara Quinn's story is every saloon girl who scrubbed blood from the floorboards at dawn, while the men who spilled it stumbled home to wives who never asked questions. It's every mail-order bride who stepped off a rattling train with hope in her trunk, only to find the boots waiting for her reeked of whiskey, sweat, and a promise that turned to chains the moment the door slammed shut. It's easy to think of the Wild West as a place for outlaws, bounty hunters, and restless cattle drives. But behind every cracked leather saddle and dusty boot print was a woman forced to trade her voice for a roof, her body for an IOU written in bourbon breath. And what they lost, those women, you won't find it in your history books. You find it in the ghost towns where a single shoe lies half buried in the sand, or in the letters that never made it back east, because the man they were married to never let them finish writing. Imagine counting your life not in days lived, but nights survived. Every sunrise both a blessing and a curse because you're still trapped, still owned, still breathing someone else's air. The word freedom tastes sour on your tongue when the cost of running means a bullet in the back or the freezing dark of the desert alone. So you stay. And you mark your life in hidden scratches on the floorboard, the way Mara did. 47 lines like tiny gravestones for the girl you used to be. History likes to dress up the frontier in romance. Cowboy hats tilted low, women leaning in doorways with soft eyes and softer hands. But the truth was rougher than any dime novel. Women were currency here. Traded, won, lost and beaten until their names slipped out of their mouths and into someone else's ledger. No one carved monuments for them. The only proof they ever lived was in the babies they buried under unmarked stones or the stories passed around saloon tables when the whiskey ran low. That's why Mara Quinn's story cuts deep, because it's real in all the ways that make you uncomfortable. Her bruises are the bruises of thousands. Her silence in the night is the silence of every woman who pressed a hand over her own mouth, so her cries wouldn't wake the man snoring beside her. And her fury, the fury that hums just under the ribs. That's the part they never expect. That's the part that survives, even when her voice is gone. Some say Jedediah Holt saw that fury the first time he met her eyes. Eyes that should have been dull with fear but instead glowed like hot coals. Maybe that's why he didn't flinch when he learned the truth, that Mara was once just another piece of Rufus McCade's whiskey empire. Maybe he knew better than most what happens when you push a soul so far into the dirt, it finds claws it never knew it had. Even now, if you walk through what's left of Dead Man's Hollow, you can still feel it. The old boards under your boots whisper with the secrets of girls who came before. You see it in the scorch marks on the storehouse foundation, where barrels of whiskey once stacked like a king's treasure. They burned it all, Mara and Jedediah, because sometimes the only way to kill a monster is to salt the earth it feeds on. This story, her story, isn't just a tragedy, it's a testament that you can be sold like cattle, chained like a dog, beaten until your name is just a prayer under your breath, and still find a way to stand. Still find a way to look your monster in the eye and say, I'm not yours anymore. Because freedom isn't always the sound of a gunshot. Sometimes it's the hush of footsteps as you walk away from the body you could have left bleeding in the dirt and choose instead to let him live, knowing you won. That's the real Wild West nobody wants to tell you about. The women who survived it didn't all swing revolvers from their hips or slip derringers up their sleeves. Some of them fought with silence, some with secrets, some with the simple, stubborn refusal to stay down. Mara Quinn is all of them. She's the ghost in the rafters of every abandoned saloon, the match in the dark that burned the empire that thought it owned her, and the quiet voice inside every woman who's ever whispered, not anymore. Some nights when the walls of Rufus McCade's house felt like they were closing in, Mara Quinn's mind drifted far away from Dead Man's Hollow. She'd lie awake on the straw pallet he called a bed, hands raw from scrubbing the storehouse floors, and think back to Santa Fe, to the dust, the dusk, and her mama's whisper. She was only 8 the first time her mother pressed a stick into her palm and showed her how to draw letters in the dirt behind the tiny boarding house they shared. Your name is yours, Mara. Nobody can take it if you know how to spell it. They spent hours there, tracing the same crooked letters until Mara could close her eyes and see them behind her lids. M. A. A. She didn't know then that those 4 letters would be her anchor when the world tried to drown her. She didn't know they'd be the last thing she'd mouth again and again to remind herself she hadn't vanished completely. Not yet. Far across the hollow, Jedediah Holt knew a different kind of ghost. Some nights he'd pitch camp outside town, where the trees swallowed the wind, and stare at the pine box he'd carved for Susanna in his mind 100 times over. She'd died on soil soaked with Rufus McCade's whiskey, a deal gone wrong, a stray bullet that wasn't stray at all. Jedediah held her in his arms as her blood sank into the same dirt that fattened McCade's coffers. After that, bounty after bounty blurred into one long chase. He tracked men across frozen ridges, through cactus flats, and into rivers swollen with spring melt. He dragged them back, dead or alive, hoping every payday might bury the taste of Susanna's name on his tongue. But it never did. It just made him meaner, quieter, a man who slept with one eye open, as if the guilt itself might slit his throat in the dark. But guilt, Mara would think if she knew, is a tether, and a tether can be cut. It's funny how these pieces of the past float up when you least expect them. Like the story Mara once heard in hushed rumor at McCade's saloon, the tale of Belle Siddons. They called Belle a queen of cards, an outlaw in velvet and lace. She'd survived shootouts in Deadwood, betrayal from a man she nearly married, and a bounty on her head so high even Pinkertons flinched. Folks claimed she once slipped a derringer from her garter and shot a man dead across a poker table. never spilling her drink. Mara clung to that legend like a charm against her ribs, proof that sometimes the West's deadliest outlaws didn't wear spurs. They wore corsets and smiled while they loaded their pistols. So when Jedediah Holt stepped out of the storehouse shadows that night, torchlight flickering on the ruin they'd made together, Mara wasn't afraid, not of him. She leaned against the sagging barn wall, bruises hidden under her sleeves, and studied the scars on his face like she was reading a map. "What do you see when you look at me?" she asked, voice low enough the night had to lean in to catch it. Jedediah didn't shift, didn't breathe a lie. He just met her eyes the way he hadn't dared before. "Someone who doesn't know they're already free." The words rattled her like a bullet cracking a whiskey bottle. She'd been counting marks under the bed for so long, she'd forgotten freedom might be something you could carry inside you, not just steal in the dead of night. And yet, even then, Mara knew freedom was a choice you had to make every sunrise. Sometimes that choice looked like fire, the storehouse roaring behind them, smoke curling up to the same stars Susanna used to watch. Sometimes it looked like a river at dawn. That morning, Mara knelt in the shallows where the water ran cold enough to numb her cracked knuckles. Blood drifted in lazy spirals around her wrists as she scrubbed at the cuts Rufus left behind. She stared down at her reflection, dirt smudge, eyes rimmed red, and whispered to the girl in the water, "I'm still here. He can't have all of me." Behind her, Jedediah's boots crunched the riverbank stones, but he didn't speak. He just stood guard, one revolver loose at his hip, like maybe, just maybe, the fight wasn't only his to win anymore. In these crossroads towns, a man might rule with whiskey and fear, but sometimes all it took to bring him down was a girl who could still remember how to spell her own name in the dirt. Midnight in Dead Man's Hollow didn't belong to the living. It belonged to the creak of warped floorboards, the scrape of boots on dirt, and the low rattle of chains in the back of Rufus McCade's whiskey storehouse. It was here that Jedediah Holt crouched in the shadows, revolver drawn, eyes sweeping the darkness for the ledgers that would bleed McCade dry. Outside, the wind moaned through the slats of the old structure. The barrels lining the walls sweated the sour tang of bourbon and bad deals. Jedediah moved quiet as smoke, the scar on his cheek catching the flicker of the lone oil lamp he'd risked lighting. He found the ledgers quick enough, pages stuffed with numbers, names, roots carved into the desert like veins. Proof that Rufus didn't just trade whiskey, he traded people too. But a man like Rufus never let secrets rot unattended. The whisper of boots on the far side of the storehouse made Jedediah's pulse tighten. He snuffed the lamp and pressed himself against a stack of crates reeking of mash. He counted 2, no, 3 shadows weaving between the rows. Hired guns. Probably half drunk, but that only made them meaner. He stayed low, moving along the crates like a coyote slipping past a sleeping camp. But the men knew the ground better. They herded him slow, one down each aisle. Barrels of whiskey turned to walls that cornered him in stale, sour air. The first gunshot cracked the quiet like dry wood splitting. Jedediah ducked, a splinter from a busted crate slicing his temple. He fired back, once, twice, but the shots went wide. The shadows closed in. Then came the lantern, a flash of warm light, sudden and jarring. It flew through the air in an arc, oil sloshing from its belly, flame licking the edges of the crates. Jedediah saw her, Mara Quinn, her silhouette in the storehouse door, eyes wide with something that was half terror, half dare. The lantern struck a barrel, shattering glass and reason in the same heartbeat. Flames bloomed like angry flowers, climbing the old oak staves, feeding on decades of hidden sins. The hired guns fell back, shouting, boots stomping embers that only scattered more sparks. Jedediah locked eyes with Mara through the haze. For the first time, she looked like the wildfire he'd always known she could be. But her hand trembled at her side. She'd just revealed herself to Rufus's men. No going back now. They ran. Through the side door, out into the brittle grass behind the storehouse, lungs dragging in smoke and panic. Behind them, the flames rose high enough to wake the whole hollow. Rufus McCade would know by dawn that the girl he'd bought for a losing hand of cards had just set his kingdom alight. Before the dawn came, Rufus found her. He always did. He dragged Mara into the back room by her hair, her bare feet scraping splinters from the warped boards. He threw her against the wall, breath reeking of liquor and last night's rage. He wanted answers. He wanted submission, but all he got was silence. When he slammed the door and left her there, her wrists bound with a rough scrap of rope, Mara let the dark settle around her like a blanket. The hiss of fire still burned behind her eyes. She pressed her cheek to the cold wall, the same wall she'd traced with her fingers so many nights before. She mouthed the words her mother used to hum in that old boarding house outside Santa Fe, verses from a tattered book she could never finish reading before her father pawned it for drink. Sleep, little sparrow, don't cry for the dawn. The night makes you sharper, the dark makes you strong. Sing your small song till the day breaks apart. The world can't take what you bury in your heart. A lullaby and a war drum, all in one. The more Rufus struck her down, the more she remembered the sound of her own name scratched in dirt. Outside, the hollow whispered, Mara Quinn, not slave, not whore, not ruined. When the sun finally cracked over the ridges, Dead Man's Hollow stirred like a hive kicked awake. The storehouse was a black skeleton on the edge of town, flames still licking its bones. Smoke smeared the sky, thick and sour, staining everything it touched. By then, the rumors had already taken root. Some said Jedediah Holt did it, the bounty hunter with the scar and the storm-colored eyes, but most pointed their shaking fingers at the girl they used to pity. Mara Quinn, the one they called sweet, the one they'd seen with split lips and downcast eyes, scrubbing the saloon floors while McCade drank her name away. No one could believe she'd lit the first match, but in every hush-hushed corner, every back porch where wives traded gossip before the men came home, one question crackled through the cinders. If that girl can burn him down, what else can she do? And deep inside that scorched ruin, beneath the smoke and charred staves, the answer glowed like an ember waiting for wind. Because sometimes the only way to be free is to watch the world that bound you turn to ash and stand, smoke in your hair, unbowed. Rufus McCade hit the riverbank with a crack of bone on rock. The current clawed at his boots, half submerged in the icy shallows, but he didn't feel the cold. Not with the pain burning up his spine where Jedediah Holt's boot had pinned him moments before. Now, free of the bounty hunter's heel, Rufus clawed at the mud like a dog, scrambling for a grip that would not come. Mara Quinn stepped into the pale dawn light behind him, the sun just now breaking over Dead Man's Hollow, making the water shimmer like fresh silver. She could taste the fire on her tongue, the char from the storehouse still clinging to her hair and skin, and in her hands, a revolver heavy with a promise that had been brewing since the first night Rufus locked her in the back room and told her she was nothing. He turned half blind with river grit and terror, his good eye squinting against the new day he'd once thought belonged to him alone. His voice cracked, high and desperate. You're nothing without me, Mara. You hear me? This town will chew you up. You'll come crawling back. She didn't answer, not with her mouth. Inside her mind, she repeated the words she'd whispered to her reflection in the creek when she washed his blood from her wrists. I am everything you're not, and I'm free. The river gurgled around them like a witness. Somewhere behind her, Jedediah Holt stood silent at the tree line. He didn't call out. He didn't move to stop her. This was her reckoning, and he knew it. Mara stepped closer, boots sinking in the cold sludge. Rufus tried to scuttle back, but slipped, landing on his back like a hog upended for slaughter. His hands came up, the same hand that once ripped buttons from her dress, cracked her ribs, left bruises where no one would see. Now they were shaking, fingers splayed, trembling in the mud. She raised the gun. The barrel found the hollow between his eyes like it belonged there. Rufus whimpered, a sound Mara had waited a lifetime to hear. She could feel the pulse in her trigger finger, the slow, steady promise that one pull would make it all quiet. The river would wash him away, the hollow would go silent, and every bruise would have its price paid in lead. Do it, Rufus spat, defiant even now. You're just like me. You kill me. You're just like me. A thin laugh slipped from Mara's cracked lips. Not cruel, but sad, like the ghost of a girl she used to be. She clicked back the hammer. The sound echoed through the trees, a sharp finality that made even the birds hush in the branches. but the trigger never pulled. Because standing there, feet in the river, gun aimed at the monster who thought he owned her soul, it was the taste of freedom on her tongue. It was the way Rufus's eyes widened when he understood she would not grant him the release he craved. She leaned in, her breath misting in the cold morning air, voice low and steady. "If I kill you, you die knowing you still mattered. But if I let you live," she paused, savoring the confusion that flickered in his swollen face. "You wake up every day remembering you lost everything, to the girl you thought you broke." She eased her finger off the trigger, slow, deliberate. The hammer clicked forward, not a shot, but a nail sealing the coffin of who she'd been before this moment. Behind her, Jedediah's boots shifted on the pebbles. He watched her lower the gun, watched her step back as Rufus gasped in the mud, choking on the taste of his own cowardice. And for the first time since Susanna's pine box, he let his shoulders drop. Because vengeance is easy, but mercy that cuts deeper than any bullet, that's the wound a coward can't drink away. Mara turned without another word. She left Rufus McCade in that river, shivering, broken, half drowned in the shallow water. Left him with nothing but the echoes of a girl's footsteps, receding up the bank toward a dawn that no longer belonged to him. And as she passed Jedediah, revolver still warm in her hand, he met her eyes, not with pity, but with something that looked dangerously close to belief. In Dead Man's Hollow, they'd buried bodies for decades, but this was the first time they buried a monster and left him breathing. In the end, Mara Quinn didn't find her freedom at the barrel of a gun. She found it in the quiet strength to walk away. Maybe that's the lesson we can carry into our lives today. In a world that still tries to buy or break people through power, money, or fear, it's not always a bullet that changes everything. Sometimes it's a choice. The choice to say, "I am more than what was done to me." The choice to stand up, not just for yourself, but for every silent voice that never got to speak. And maybe that's the part that makes this story linger. Because even now in small towns, in big cities across America, there are folks, mothers, fathers, daughters, carrying bruises you can't see. Some scars run deeper than skin. But like Mara, they deserve to know they're not alone. So I ask you, what would you have done in her boots? Would you have pulled the trigger? Or would you let him live with the taste of his own cowardice every single day? Tell me down in the comments, what would freedom look like to you if you were Mara Quinn? Do you believe some monsters should be left breathing or buried deep? I read every word you share. If this story touched your heart tonight, I hope you'll give it a like, subscribe for more tales like this, and maybe share it with someone who needs to remember they're not broken. They're braver than they think.